There are certain former UFC champions who have accomplished great things in the promotion, where as of right now they are going through a rough patch which may have a big impact on their legacies. So here is 5 fighters who may have tarnished their legacies in the UFC. Number 5. Anthony Pettis was once one of the most dangerous lightweights in the UFC, where at one point he just looked unstoppable. He was known for his flashy fighting style, where he would break his opponents down with his unorthodox strikes and would always pull off crazy finishes. He was able to capture the UFC lightweight title when he defeated Benson Henderson by an armbar in the first round at UFC 164. He would next successfully defend his title against Gilbert Melendez at UFC 181, finishing the fight by a guillotine choke in the second round. Anthony Pettis had looked unstoppable, and he looked like he would hold on to the title for a very long time. In his second title defense, he would get dominated for all 5 rounds by Rafael dos Anjos, losing his title by a unanimous decision. With this devastating loss, Anthony Pettis was never the same. He would next lose to both Eddie Alvarez and Edson Barboza by a unanimous decision, which forced him down to the featherweight division, where he was able to pull off a submission victory over Charles Oliveira. He would next lose the interim title fight against Max Holloway at UFC 206, which forced him back up to the lightweight division, where he was able to pick up a unanimous decision win over Jim Miller at UFC 213. He most recently lost to Dustin Poirier by TKO at UFC Final 120. Anthony Pettis has not looked the same ever since losing his title to Rafael dos Anjos, where hopefully he is able to figure himself out and come back better with the win. Number 4. Rashad Evans was once the most dominant light heavyweight in the UFC, who was known for his great wrestling skills and knockout power. He had been the long-time gatekeeper of the 205-pound division and had remained on the top of the weight class for a very long time. After dominantly defeating Chael Sonnen by TKO at UFC 167, Rashad Evans suffered a string of injuries which would force him out of action for almost 2 years. In his comeback fight, he was scheduled to face Ryan Bader at UFC 192. In the fight, Rashad Evans didn't seem like his normal self and would lose the fight by a unanimous decision. He would next lose to Glover Teixeira by knockout at UFC on Fox 19, which forced him to drop down to the middleweight division, where he would next lose to top 15 middleweights in both Dan Kelly and Sam Alvey. Rashad Evans has accomplished so much in his UFC career, where the more he loses, definitely tarnishes his career. Hopefully he is able to come back better than ever and walk away from the sport with a victory. Number 3. BJ Penn was one of the most iconic lightweights on the planet, who was able to hold 2 titles in 2 different weight classes. He was one of the biggest draws in the UFC, who was known for his exceptional boxing skills and his world-class grappling skills. In 2012, BJ Penn announced his comeback to active competition after almost 2 years away from the sport, and was booked to face Frankie Edgar in a featherweight bout at the Ultimate Fighter 19 finale. In the fight, BJ Penn would viciously get beaten down by Frankie Edgar, losing the fight by TKO in the 3rd round. He would next take another break from the sport, and in 2017 he announced his comeback against Yair Rodriguez with the hopes of conquering the division, but things didn't go to plan. He would get mauled by Yair Rodriguez, losing the fight by TKO in the 2nd round at UFC Final 103, and would next lose to Dennis Silva by a majority decision at UFC Final 112. BJ Penn is currently on a 5-fight losing streak and hasn't won a fight since 2010. He has suffered many losses in his UFC career, which have had an impact on his legacy, but hopefully he is able to retire with his hands raised. Number 2. Anderson Silva has always been one of the most recognizable names in the UFC. He was the long-reigning UFC middleweight champion and was able to defend his title 10 consecutive times, where he put together a highlight reel of spectacular finishes. In his 11th title defense, he was booked to face Chris Weidman at UFC 162. In the fight, he would get knocked out in the 2nd round, losing his middleweight title. He was given an immediate rematch, where he broke his leg in the 2nd round and was sidelined for almost 2 years. In 2015, he announced his comeback and was booked to face Nick Diaz at UFC 183, where after the 5 rounds, the unanimous decision was given to Anderson Silva. After the fight, both fighters tested positive for banned substances, and Anderson Silva was suspended for a year. He would come back in 2016 and would lose to Michael Bisping by a unanimous decision at UFC Final 84, and next lost a unanimous decision to Daniel Cormier at UFC 200. He finally broke his losing streak and defeated Derek Brunson by a unanimous decision at UFC 208. He was next pulled from his fight with Kelvin Gastelum at UFC Final 122 due to testing positive again for banned substances. He is looking at a suspension, which may be between 4 to 8 years away from the sport. Anderson Silva's image has been tainted with both of these failed drug tests, which casts a dark shadow over his career, where we may never see him compete ever again. Number 1. Jon Jones is considered by many to be the best pound-for-pound fighter on the planet. He is the youngest UFC champion ever, and whilst he was the champion, he was able to defend his title 8 consecutive times. His career has been tarnished with incidents happening both in and outside the octagon. He has had many obstacles in his path, in which he has had to overcome in making his return to active competition. In 2016, he made his comeback and successfully defeated Ovince St. Preux at UFC 197 to become the interim UFC light heavyweight champion. He was set to unify his title against Daniel Cormier at UFC 200, but just a day before the fight, fight, Jon Jones was removed from the event due to testing positive for banned substances and was suspended for a year. He was set to make his comeback and was booked against his longtime rival Daniel Cormier at UFC 214 for the title. In the fight, Jon Jones was able to knock out Daniel Cormier in the third round, winning back his title. It was later found that Jon Jones failed his drug test for turinabol and was stripped of his title. He is looking at a 4-year suspension, which will be catastrophic for his career. These recent failed drug tests has left a massive stain on his legacy, where his previous wins have come into questioning. He is one of the most talented fighters in the world, where we may not see him compete for a very long time.